Hi, my face looks different because I had surgery recently. I will link the announcement video about that in the description below in case you hadn't heard. But now on to what we're actually going to be talking about today, which is gender theory. Traditionally, there are two main schools of thought in gender theory, essentialism and performativism. Essentialism says you have an essential gender that has always been the case and will never change. The transphobic version bases this on native sex, while the trans-friendly one bases it on post-transitional gender identity. Both versions insist that this essential gender outranks lived, performed, and perceived gender. If someone whose essential gender is male, by whatever metric you're using, is living as a woman and being perceived as such by everyone around them, essentialism insists that this person is a man, even if nothing about their current experience aligns with that. Performativism, on the other hand, says there is no real gender, there is only performance and perception. If you're presenting as a woman, you are a woman. If you're presenting as a man, you are a man. You could be in straight up drag. It doesn't matter what your gender identity or your birth sex is. The only thing that matters is what you're presenting to the world, and that can obviously change. I don't think either of these really get the whole picture. I think there is something deep down that gives consistency to who you are as a person and how you feel about your gender, but it's something much more abstract than a gender identity and much less tangible than sex characteristics. Gender is a social construct. It's an artificial pattern we created to make sense of the world, not the actual nature of that world. It's the language we use, not the essence that we're describing with it. It can only ever simplify that essence's true complexity and will never truly do it justice. Just like Plato said that real things can never truly replicate the ideas they represent. And gender is a rule set. You can't really be a gender if you follow none of its rules. If your body and looks and experience all say one thing and you or someone else insists you're another, no you're not. And that goes for both the transphobes and the baby trans. In the latter case, that doesn't mean they will never become the gender they say they are. But during that beginning phase, a gender identity is more of a mission statement than a reflection of their actual current situation. I don't think mid-transition and non-passing trans people are really either a gender role. They're a work in progress. And working towards something while you may not have achieved it yet still makes you more qualified at it than someone who isn't actively training for that qualification. Like, I'm not a fully qualified electrician and I don't think I'll ever be, but I'm also not an electrician, because I do at least have a level 2 electrical qualification, which is more than most people do. So am I really an electrician? Does it matter? I know how to do the bit of electrical work that will be relevant to my line of work. What more do you need? You know? Like, people get too caught up in labels and whether trans people are the same thing as cis people of their gender identity. Like, I don't care whether you really believe that trans men are men and trans women are women, let alone whether non-binary people are valid. I just want you to realize that regardless of what you think trans people actually are, the thing they definitely aren't is the same thing as cis people of their birth sex. Because if they were, they probably wouldn't be out here desperately trying to change their sex characteristics. That is a symptom of the medical condition known as transsexualism, gender dysphoria, transgenderism, or more broadly these days, as gender incongruence. In the trans community, we have this concept of eggs. An egg is a future trans person who hasn't figured out they're trans yet. It's different from someone who is fully aware of what they are and merely isn't out about it. That's just being in the closet. This is someone who themselves doesn't know yet. When they finally do realize it, their egg cracks. An essentialist might look at an egg and say, well, they're already experiencing symptoms of transgenderism like dysphoria, even if they don't know what that is or what causes it yet. Therefore, they're already a trans person. I disagree with this. I don't think it's incorrect to call me when I was growing up a gender non-conforming girl. It's what I would have conceptualized myself as at the time due to lack of other explanations for my androgyny. I knew I was gender different since I first encountered other children in kindergarten, but I didn't find out about non-binary as a concept until I was like 17. And while I knew trans people were a thing, all I'd ever heard about was the born in the wrong body, if you want to be a boy, you can be variety. And I kind of looked at the cishet boys around me and I was like, yeah, no, definitely not that. No one told me you can be the gay crossdresser kind of boy. Ugh. My experience during that time was that of a gender non-conforming girl, not that of a transmasculine person like it is today. I wasn't living as an out trans person yet. I wasn't pursuing medical transition. I didn't even know that I was going to grow up to be anything other than a cishet woman yet. I was already experiencing dysphoria symptoms, but I struggled to conceptualize that alone as teen me being trans rather than teen me experiencing the heralds of transness to come. Like, I also don't think that eggs are the same thing as cis people in that eggs are predestined to crack and become trans people. But I don't think an egg and the trans person they will become are the same thing either. An egg is someone trying their hardest to make the gender they're inhabiting at the time work, while dysphoria is making them miserable for it. To anyone but themselves and the occasional trans peer sniffing out their egg behavior, they are indistinguishable from cis people of their birth sex until they crack. Eggs exist in this weird limbo state of feeling that something is deeply wrong, but not knowing what or why or how to fix it or that one could ever fix it at all. Like, they know something's up, but they haven't figured out the concrete nature of or answer to their dilemma yet.
You felt it your entire life, that there's something wrong with the world. You don't know what it is, but it's there, like a splinter in your mind, driving you mad.
I think it's quite telling that the two most famous pieces of egg-made media, The Matrix and Nimona, the comic, not the movie, feature protagonists of the same birth sex as the people who made them. They do, however, also feature secondary characters or forms that align with the usual gender envy archetypes. If you know any white trans lesbians, you cannot tell me that Trinity is not the most wanna be her, wanna be with her to them. Like, look at her. Look at her. Oh my god. And revolve around scenarios intimately mirroring trans experiences. A trans person, meanwhile, is someone who has figured out that there is a scenario where they wouldn't have to be miserable all the time, and then generally tries their hardest to get to that place until they reach it. A trans person is able to properly examine and make sense of their feelings, put them in the right context, and figure out what they need and want for their treatment. Teen me wasn't a trans person. Teen me was an egg, indistinguishable from a gender non-conforming cis girl. Our feelings inform our self-concept, which informs our aim and what we're trying to communicate to the outside, which dictates our actions, which influence our looks and our performance, which dictate other people's perception of us. Therefore, I define gender as one's body and what one does with it. Those are our means of communication. Neither our internal feelings nor other people's perception of us is actually going to make a direct impact on what we tangibly are. If you identify as something other than what you're living as, but you never do anything about it or tell anyone, it doesn't really matter on a practical level, does it? And other people's perception is merely their subjective response to our communication. It is not a reflection of reality. Like, if people look at someone like Finster and mistake him for a cis girl, that doesn't suddenly make him an actual cis girl. Gender is based on the concept of sex difference, but goes far beyond actual sex. So bodies and sex characteristics are inherently a part of it, but they're not all there is to it either. We choose how we present our body, and in some cases even what we want our body itself to look like. Those are mutable things that are within our control to whatever extent. Trans people do an extreme version of this kind of modification to express their gender, going as far as changing their actual sex characteristics within the limitations imposed by physiology and modern medicine, of course. But that doesn't mean cis people don't modify their body and presentation to express their gender. Gender performance is often exaggerated according to the relevant gender role. It's like straight people drag, but worryingly unironic. Joan Riviere, one of Freud's disciples, called women's performance masquerade. Men's is often referred to as parade. I shall be borrowing these pre-existing terms for simplicity's sake. So, masquerade posits that woman hides her real self and constructs a fake new one on top, like a mask. Jones supposed that this real self was an inherently masculine one, as contrasted against the feminine mask, which I disagree with. The mask state is about self-scrutiny, intention, and control. You're presenting the observer with the image you want them to see. You're mindful of their perception of you. The unmasked state is merely a more relaxed, authentic, and raw version of the person in question. There is no worrying about perceptions and no particular intention. They are merely existing, with practicality and comfort superseding performance. This includes the process of constructing the mask, like a drag queen putting on her makeup. Like, take Prickly Alpaca of Sewing and Crafting YouTube, for example. She makes these incredible flowy dresses and cute tops and stuff that are all very extra and pretty and femme. But while she makes them, her clothing style is that of a butch goblin, affectionate, in t-shirts and sports shorts, because that is comfortable and practical, unlike the flashy fashion and costume pieces she makes for her channel. The unmasked state is generally meant to be unperceived and therefore genderless in a performative sense. If gender is the performance, there is no gender backstage. This phenomenon is not unique to the female gender role. There is the concept of masking in the neurodiverse community, there is the concept of code switching, and even for trans people there is a similar distinction between the level of gender performance required in front of other people versus how much of that is actually needed for your own comfort. The primary reason for trans people to medically transition is to be comfortable with themselves in a mask-off state, not to conform to gender role expectations, which is why a lot of trans people don't actually get all of the things they medically could. The mask isn't inherently good or bad, nor is it fake or a fully different person, nor is it hiding ill intent or hollowness underneath. It is merely a chosen performance that is part of its performer. It is woman's hideout, armor, and canvas all at once. She can use it to manipulate other people's perception of her, to keep distance between herself and others, and she can express herself using it beyond what her natural body would allow for. Her full range of self is not necessary for everyday activities. You don't need to be able to talk about your innermost feelings if you're dealing with strangers or acquaintances. The mask allows for privacy while staying cordial. It's about retaining control. The transition between the mask and its wearer must be seamless in order to hide the mask's existence. If people knew you were hiding something from them, they might become offended or suspicious of you, and matriarchy says you are to offend no one and keep your secrets. So the illusion must be perfect. It's like ballet. The quality of your performance isn't merely about nailing that technically complex or physically demanding jump or turn. It is just as much, if not more, about keeping up your posture and grace throughout the whole thing, even while you're resting between the hard bits, in order to make everything look equally effortless. That trained idle position must become second nature to the performer, to the point that they don't even think about it anymore and just default to it in any situation. Like smiling. A significant portion of the matriarchal in-group just smiles by default, even when talking about the most horrendous, traumatic, or infuriating shit. I do it, my mom does it, the cis gays do it. Like, my last therapist pointed it out to me, and I had to be like, previous therapist had already pointed that out years ago, but my mom recently had a fight with her coworkers and wanted to mope by not smiling at them for a while, and she said she struggled with that because it's just her default. If you defaulted to it your entire life, it's hard to not do that anymore, Or I watched this documentary by Ollie Alexander from a few years ago, about the gay community and their bad mental health and eating disorders and stuff, and man smiled through most of it, and I'm just like, damn bitch. Parade, meanwhile, has men project their gender as loudly as they possibly can in order to forcefully convince people of it. Unlike matriarchy's more insidious cringe and shame, patriarchy punishes fuck-ups with ridicule and straight-up violence, so there is no room to fuck up and refine. You have to nail it first try or else. So instead of trying to achieve a refined and sustained all-round image of perfection like Masquerade does, Parade focuses on individual signifiers of masculinity and goes as hard as it can on them. It's like weightlifting, a single moment of peak performance where you lift the absolute most you can in order to prove that you can lift that much, be it for only a second, and then you get to drop the weight and revel in your victory. At the beginning of their transition, trans women often go through a phase of clumsy overperformance. Part of this is the same phenomenon that teen girls go through, where they're still kind of figuring out this whole woman thing and very eager to show off newly gained skills. Except trans women go through it as adults when they're already expected to know that kind of thing. But I think another part of it is also the leftovers from that fear-driven parade mindset. They try to prove their womanhood by overperforming individual signifiers of femininity, neglecting the more important aspect of sustained baseline quality. They do not have the habit of hiding their seams yet the way a more seasoned performer would, as that is a nuanced skill that takes time to acquire. As they settle into their gender role and become used to being women, it becomes second nature to them, the same as any other women, and they eventually grow out of this phase. The opposite of this would be trans masks who are too careful in their transition and don't go hard enough on certain things and then wonder why it doesn't work properly. But I didn't write a proper section on that in my script. So unfortunately, that general idea is all you're going to get. And also, we're here to talk about women, aren't we? So I have excuses. Men only enhance to their natural limitations and their modifications. A guy might go to the gym to get buff, but he wouldn't wear a padded shirt to achieve the same look. Patriarchy values function over form. Its aesthetics need to be backed up with action. Actual muscles provide strength that a padded shirt couldn't, and strength is the actual physical signifier of masculinity that they are interested in. Because of this logic, on the parade, artifice can never live up to natural achievement. Women go far beyond their natural limitations in their modifications. They spend an insane amount of time, money, effort, and discomfort on their looks in order to achieve their desired image. This doesn't have to be their best look, if such a thing even exists. I don't believe someone who is generally comfortable in their mask-off state needs to do major alterations to their body in order to look their best. Instead, it may be following a trend, or trying to achieve a certain type of look, or adhering to a norm among your peer group, a pattern prescribed by yourself or others to fit yourself into as best you can. There have been many insane achievements made in order to enable women to essentially become shapeshifters. You can change your hair from anything to anything else. You can straighten it or curl it, including chemically perming it. You can bleach and dye it. You can cut it to look a certain way, or wear a wig, or get extensions. There are so many ways to remove body hair: shaving, hair removal cream, wax, epilators, semi-permanent, permanent solutions like laser hair removal. You can have any kind of nails, fake, shaped, painted, decorated. You can fake or prevent tanning. You can draw in a whole new face, whether that's contour or overdrawn lips or fake eyelashes. You can alter your proportions and silhouette with shapewear like Spanx or push-up bras, corsetry, petticoats, crinolines, bustling. You can change your height with heels or platforms. You can even get your actual body surgically altered in a lot of ways. And no matter how fucked up the reasons for trends demanding a certain look may be, there is still power in taking the impossible and making it possible. And the matriarchy form is the function, as beauty is women's physical power area, just like strength is men's. Therefore, well-executed artifice and natural gifts are equally valid achievements. I mostly talk about the physical looks aspect of gender performance here, but this general logic does also apply to other things like, voice and body language and all sorts of other stuff. Patriarchy separates the metaphysical from the physical. Certain patriarchal powers can be wielded by their idea alone, while others cannot be faked. If you look strong, you might be able to intimidate someone with your looks alone, but you won't be able to lift heavy stuff unless you are actually strong. This is why man's metaphysical power can be wielded even by people who don't hold any real patriarchal power of their own, like women using the idea of man. She doesn't have to try and look like a man in order to do that. Matriarchy doesn't separate the two. Its power generally involves both the physical and the metaphysical. Beauty, for example, is a physical trait, but it can be achieved and enhanced by learned skill, and it has the metaphysical effect of provoking empathy and attraction in others. Women's power requires reality to wield it, whether it be physicality or skills, but it can be achieved both ways, which means that anyone who tries hard enough can do it. Like, a cis male drag queen isn't a real woman, but you probably struggle to conceptualize her as the whole-ass bald man named Brian that's actually under there. I am still not over learning that both Trixie and Katya are actually bald men named Brian. Who are these guys? Rationally, this isn't this, cartoon clown woman thing. But when you look at her talk or do stuff while in drag, you forget she's a dude under there. Queer men are already one step removed from traditional cis-het masculinity, so by removing themselves further from that gender role's performance via drag, they no longer register as men to our brain. Man would be bad at makeup, even if he tried. This person is clearly an expert at it. Man would never wear a dress, let alone a sparkly, fluffy pink one. This person literally sews their own outfits. Man couldn't perform feminine speech patterns and body language. This person clearly has them mastered. And this is literal cis men being able to acquire this level of matriarchal power. They're not even trying to pass as actual women. Passing, in the old school sense, refers to individuals of marginalized groups who are able to be mistaken for members of their relevant privileged group, and therefore can keep their actual identity secret and move through society unnoticed if they so choose, which is called living stealth. I pass as a native English speaker, even though I'm not one. Biracial person may pass as the dominant ethnic group of their area, so in the West that would be white passing. A gay person may pass as straight, which generally just means being gender conforming. And a trans person may pass as a cis person of the same gender identity. A lot of people who would have passed as their dominant group in ye olden days don't actually pass as that anymore, now that the general public has a better idea of what, say, biracial or trans people look like. Old school passing generally relies on ambiguity rather than actually fitting the most archetypal version of the relevant group. So that specific type of ambiguity is starting to be recognized as indicative of a separate thing these days. Like, you may think I'm a native English speaker because I'm fluent and good at mimicking pronunciations, but you wouldn't be able to pinpoint where you think I'm from based on my accent, right? It's too ambiguous for that. The way the word passing is used these days is also by far not limited to this original meaning anymore. It is more about assessing what people actually perceive you as, regardless of potential privilege, what you are, or what you're trying to be. You may pass as something entirely different from what you actually are, like a multiracial person who gets guesses about what their heritage might be, none of which ever align with the actual answers or the dominant group. You may pass as something you actively don't want to be, like me passing as a cis woman seemingly no matter what I do in my transition. Or it may be people recognizing you for what you are, but not mistaking you for the dominant group in doing so, like a trans woman who may not pass as cis, but will still be recognized as a woman. I will use this latter sense of recognition of gender identity, even if clock, so essentially the opposite of being misgendered, as the primary meaning of the word here today. Trans people are trying to be recognized, so to pass as their relevant gender. To qualify as any gender under gender roles, you need to follow enough of its rules. This means being able to prove associated gender attributes, which is harder if you didn't get those in your starter kit like everyone else. Because the female gender role equates artificial and natural achievement, trans femmes are able to substitute a lot of physical changes with enough gender conformity and daily presentational effort. Even a physically non-passing trans woman can still get gendered correctly if she nails the gender conformity. No one will look at you in a dress with long hair and your titties on display and go, "Ah yes, a normal cis man. How can I help you, sir?" Like, some of my girls will talk about getting misgendered when they really mean getting clocked. You are actually trans, so someone recognizing you as such is not inherently misgendering you. Some stranger ladying me because they didn't even notice I was trans despite my lack of tits and visible facial hair is misgendering. Some bigot clocking you and misgendering you on purpose is transphobic harassment, not genuine misgendering. Your gender was recognized. They just didn't approve of it being the case. Trans femmes' secondary reason to physically transition, besides personal comfort, tends to be to reduce the amount of this daily presentational effort and gender conformity needed. Some cis women and cross-dressing cis men also get permanent or semi-permanent changes for the same effort reduction reason. Femboys getting laser hair removal or drag queens shaving their eyebrows off is not about dysphoria. It's about making their jobs as female impersonators easier. Most trans people also aren't straight, so they are going to want to explore their gender conformity the same as their cis queer counterparts. But that's hard if you can't pass on physical attributes alone like those cis people do. A trans lesbian may have anxiety about being misgendered as a man if she were to cut her hair short, but what if she had a more feminine looking face or really noticeable boobs, you know? Trans mascs, on the other hand, need to deliver enough physical reality in order to pass as the right gender and age, as the male gender role doesn't care for artifice no matter how well executed. It also doesn't really allow for much of it, even if you tried. Men have less aesthetic resources available to them to begin with, as we discussed. Heavily controlled looks are monopolized by matriarchy, so inherently read as feminine. Masculinity in a lot of ways actually defines itself through its unrefinedness. So how are you meant to use refined aesthetic skills in order to mimic unrefinedness itself? And male expression doesn't allow for as much hidden fuckery as female expression does. As a woman, you can stuff a bra or wear heavy makeup and get away with it because most women already wear bras and makeup. Cis men do not wear binders, nor do they draw their beards on with mascara. This makes it harder to pass for trans mascs no matter how gender conforming they are. I had my pre-med butch face, short hair and all, and I still got misgendered just as much as if I dressed femme. Other trans mascs will pass, but only as teen boys rather than the grown-ass adults that they are. I used to think that this was feminism's fault for normalizing women wearing men's clothes, but parade is just as much at fault. On top of that, trans mascs are also more likely to be significantly more gender conforming than cis men. This is less of a problem the other way around because women have a lot of gender conformity normalized for them these days. Like, if a trans woman has a male-dominated job or hobby or wears a blazer and some pants, that's not entirely unheard of for a woman to do, so she won't inherently risk getting misgendered for it. The same is not true for men. Transmascs also grew up with options, so we're less willing to give up on our aesthetic standards and habits and limit ourselves to the cishet male range instead. Just because you barbarian brutes didn't spend your whole life studying the dark arts doesn't mean you get to ban me from practicing my spells. I'll take my axe and my magics, thank you very much. You might find that a lot of us wear long hair or fun clothes or like to mess around with makeup. We generally dress well, or at least better than most cis men, notably the sad short king incel types with zero confidence in their looks that physically resemble us the most. And just the sheer amount of no shirt with a skirt looks you see at trans pride events, like I swear to God, trans femmes tend to embrace their new genitals aesthetics more for the same reason we don't, because matriarchy simply has more aesthetic freedom than patriarchy. Because of all this, we end up relating to queer masculinity more than the straight version. Even those among us who exclusively date women often still end up reading as effeminate or queer because of their fashions or speech patterns. Both queerness and transness remove you one step from cishet gender roles, so now you're 2 steps removed from recognizable manhood, and you can't use artifice to replicate traditional masculinity, which you also refuse to bow to begin with. So now we just play aesthetics on super hardcore nightmare mode, and it's fine, I'm fine. Just sucking my life energy on a daily basis, it's fine. Ladies, you think pregnancy is a challenge to your aesthetic prowess? Try being a cis male drag queen trapped in the body of a girl boss, okay? Transmascs end up relying almost exclusively on medical transition to be recognized as their gender, notably if they're non-conforming in some way. Patriarchy accepts even the most shittily executed real physical attribute as valid proof. A flat chest, however scarred. Facial hair, however patchy. A deep voice, however poorly used. A body with big muscles or male fat distribution, no matter how misshapen. Male pattern hair loss, no matter how unflattering. Those things can't really be faked by the average cis woman, so they're trusted to vouch for you not being one of those. The only transmasc I've witnessed reliably pass as something other than a cis woman, in spite of retaining extreme femme presentation or forgoing top surgery, were people who whole-assed the rest of their transition and usually were already working off of an androgynous base. Even I eventually caved and had to accept that my body was just not going to do what I needed to on a half dose and with a bio girl baby face. At least not if I wanted to keep wearing flamboyant clothes, long hair, and little to no facial hair. So I got my hormone dose raised, and I'm working out and attempting to gain muscle. I mean, look, it's doing something, but it's definitely not fucking anywhere yet. So we're working on it. And I spend my savings on getting facial masculinization surgery. Who needs to afford a mortgage anytime soon anyway, right? What were we doing again? Right, the female gender role, right, okay.